Good morning. Want to welcome you to this Easter sunrise service. Hope you all have your coffee. Had a little problem this morning. My coffee pot didn't work. But God takes care of us. I want to read you scripture here to start the morning. It's from John chapter 20. It's verses 1 through 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. She came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one God loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head, the other at the feet. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I'll get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out loud in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them what he had said, the things to her. For those of us who are Christians, the resurrection is like the central hub of our faith. It's the central hub of all history. Everything surrounds it, before and after. You know, whether you're a Christian who looks at the resurrection as a historical event, or if you look at it as kind of a spiritual truth, the message of the resurrection is absolute center to what we believe. It was the central message recorded in all four Gospels. Now Mark, Matthew, Luke, they all report some variety of people visited the tomb on that first day of the week. Matthew and Luke say it was dawn. Mark says it's when the sun had risen. John alone notes that Mary Magdalene went to the tomb while it was still dark. Now, if you're worried about why some of them say one time and some of them say another, I think you'd kind of be missing the point. See, John's kind of an interesting writer. He's kind of like the poet-philosopher of the group. And John's gospel tends to be highly symbolic. It never means just what the words say. There are themes that run throughout it. And even from the beginning of John's gospel, John refers to Jesus as the light that has come into the world. And so I don't think that John forgot that the sun might have come up. I don't think it's a mere historical rendering. When Mark says it's dark, it means he can't see. When John says it's dark, it means a lot more than just physical darkness. Before this, last time we see Mary Magdalene, she's at the feet of the cross with Jesus. There with Jesus' mother and Jesus' aunt and John. She's the first at the tomb and the first to see Jesus after the resurrection. She wasn't some fringe person in Jesus' followers. She was right there in the middle of them. She was there at the darkest time for all of them. She watched him die, brutally beaten, crucified, between two criminals. For her, it was about as dark as it gets. For her spiritually, for her heart, for her soul. And when she comes to the tomb on that morning, it's still dark. It's still dark for her. She's in deep sorrow and grief and disbelief, and trying to put it together. Is the representation of Saturday for us after Good Friday is that it's dark. And we remember how the disciples must have felt that Jesus was gone. The light had been taken out of the world. It was dark. And when John talks about the darkness for Mary, he wasn't just talking about she'd had a bad weekend from Good Friday. Because he had always talked about Jesus being the light of the world. No matter how much darkness there was, it couldn't put out that light. And what he's showing is that how Mary lives out that hope. And what happens when she comes to the tomb? And she doesn't leave. Everybody else heads out, everybody else moves, everybody else goes, but not Mary. Mary hangs in there. Mary waits. Mary hasn't forgotten. And I think it kind of reminds us that we're kind of in a time of darkness right now. A lot of folks are losing hope. I had a message from a friend who was talking how he had come back from Good Friday service and how hard it was for him, because he was thinking about all the things that are going on in the world and the things that are just terrible things. And you could hear the darkness of the soul. we've all been through dark times, and we've never been through times like this. But I think Easter Sunday reminds us that there's more going on here than just darkness. There's a light that Jesus has brought into the world, and the darkness can't put it out. Like the sun coming up this morning, it can't be put out. But we're going through a time when there just seems to be so much grief and pain and suffering and uncertainty of what will happen next and where the future holds. And Jesus says, I got this. I got this. It's so easy for us to stay in bed, pull the covers over our head, and just fall into despair. But the light comes out. Mary turns and sees Jesus, thinks he's the gardener, asks him where he goes, and then he calls her name. Calls her name like nobody else had. If you remember when you were a kid, you knew your parents' voice when they said your name. And you could tell how they said it, whether it was good news or bad news. But nonetheless, you knew their voice. And when Jesus speaks her name, she realizes it is Jesus. He's risen. The tears vanish. Her prayers are answered. And Mary becomes the first evangelist in the Christian church. She takes the good news that Christ is risen, he is risen indeed, and runs and tells the other disciples. She was faithful while it was dark. And she was prepared for the light. Easter dawned. The light came back into the world. Actually, the light had never left the world, but people saw the light. The Christian life is kind of like we meet Jesus sooner or later. Some of us meet him when we're children. Some of us meet him when we're adults. And even in those times, there are things that happen where life just goes dark. Things seem to dry up. Things just don't go the way we thought they would. And Jesus tells us and reminds us on Easter morning that I am the light in the midst of the darkness. And I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. You will not be orphans. You are mine. Our Easter experience is that there is light in the midst of the darkness. Christ has risen. He has risen indeed. Y'all have a blessed day.